Welcome to The Road. This is a weekly podcast of All Saints Lutheran Church. I'm your host, John Pedersen, and I serve as pastor. Each week, we reflect on faith, life, and navigating the road ahead. The language of journey is common when we think about life. It has its joys and challenges along the way, and we all need a little encouragement and guidance at times to keep us going. There's a word in the Bible, asphalia, which means truth, but it's the same root word we use in English for asphalt, if you can believe that. It's a solid surface that makes travel easier and more assured. And so every week we're going to be exploring elements of faith and life that keep us on the road. Faith isn't about living a perfect life. It's about finding our way, getting through rough spots, but seeking out those great vistas too. You can find my weekly message here, but you'll also find special conversations with guests who have insights on things like wellness, parenting, and living with unique purpose. If you appreciate this podcast, remember to subscribe where possible and share it with a friend. Here's this week's message. Well, we're wrapping up our series, Free Reign, today. We've been exploring the ways that the kingdom of God breaks through established patterns and expectations to bring freedom, hope, and healing, spreading the abundant life and grace of Jesus. In the first 5 chapters of Mark's gospel, we've seen that free reign expressed as Jesus has performed miraculous healings, crossed over into Gentile lands to meet and extend his ministry beyond his own people, challenged some of the practices built up around the Sabbath and associated with tax collectors and sinners. Now he's come back to his hometown. People's relationships with their hometowns can be complicated. Sometimes we mythologize our hometowns, paint them as perhaps more idyllic than they were then or now. On the other hand, some people choose to leave and never look back. Their relationship with the town or the people there may hold too much pain. Perhaps they simply didn't develop a connection, or they see it as having been too small for their aspirations or dreams. For over 10 years, I served about an hour north of Minneapolis in a county seat that wasn't all that small, but small enough that people still knew each other pretty well. And for the most part, people had a lot of affection for where they grew up. And after going off to college or work somewhere, many would come back to raise their family, or maybe just to come back for a Sunday to have their child baptized there, or just simply to visit. It was kind of a spiritual touchstone for them that they never wanted to fully part with, even if they had otherwise moved on. What is your relationship with your hometown? How do you see yourself now through the lens of where you grew up? In today's gospel, we're coming back to the hometown of Jesus. Imagine for a moment how Jesus felt about Nazareth. The kind of pattern-shaking mission he's been pursuing is now coming home. And he doesn't receive the kind of welcome that some might expect. In fact, his appearance in Nazareth irks people that he grew up with. His mission has grown beyond this small town in Galilee, which was sometimes mocked by the more cosmopolitan crowd in Jerusalem. It was viewed as a kind of backwater region, and no doubt the people there felt overlooked and underappreciated at times. After Jesus preaches in the synagogue, they say, "Where did this man get all this? What is this wisdom? What deeds of power are we seeing here? Is not this the carpenter, the son of Mary, and brother of James, and all the other brothers and sisters?" Mark says they took offense at him. In other words, they're asking, what makes him so special? The impact is notable. Mark reports that he could do no deed of power there except that he laid hands on a few sick people and cured them. It's not a bad thing for not having a lot of power, I suppose. But he was amazed at their unbelief. This tells us that the spirit and faith of a town, not to mention a person, can we say, interfere with the power of Jesus? It's pretty remarkable. It raises a question: are there ways that our own attitude and disposition can interfere with God's ability to bring the hope and healing that we ourselves seek? The people of Nazareth were filled with a bit of jealousy, suspicion, and concern about these new teachings and expressions of faith. To access the wisdom and healing that Jesus has to offer, we may need to find ways to put aside our own hang-ups. After all, Jesus went out of his way to come back home and share with them. He sought to be present with these people, and yet he was dismissed. So we find encouragement in this story to try and listen and learn from voices we might not otherwise hear, that we might be quick to dismiss. We may not choose to adopt everything they have to say, but there could be an insight worth considering. And so the story shifts, and Jesus has decided to leave Nazareth again and keep moving on to other villages. Mark says he called the 12 disciples and began to send them out 2 by 2 and gave them authority over unclean spirits. He ordered them to take nothing for their journey except a staff, no bread, no bag, no money in their belts, but only to wear sandals and not to put on 2 tunics. His words paint a picture of Christian mission as a life of simplicity. It's very compelling, but kind of a challenge to me. I tend to make things more complicated than they need to be sometimes. But I do see the wisdom and attraction of simplicity. I want us to think about this packing list as we consider what our own life of faith should entail. There are just 2 things Jesus says they can take. The first is a staff. A staff can provide assistance for hiking across difficult terrain, and it can also serve as a basic defensive weapon for fighting off animals. Taking basic care of ourselves is good. Obviously, shepherds also use them for directing sheep, but it's ultimately a survival tool. So he says this is okay to bring. And second, they can bring sandals because they're going to be putting on some miles and they need to take care of their feet. Again, to be effective, we need to look after our well-being. But they're not supposed to bring food or luggage or money. Okay, those are pretty critical things, right? Shouldn't they be allowed to take along a little bit more? But the point is, they're not to be self-reliant. The idea is to connect with people they meet and rely on their hospitality. The idea that the success of the mission will be dependent on others, not yourself, is critical. It means we have to build new relationships. We have to share the mission, not just carry the weight of it ourselves. And finally, they should not bring 2 tunics. So usually we might think 2 tunics means an extra tunic for a change of clothing. I mean, especially after walking through heat for miles and miles. Wouldn't it be nice to have a change of clothing? But in the Roman world, there were 2 garments. The first one was functional and probably equivalent to ordinary, public clothes that we might wear today. But the second tunic likely referred to the more ornamental garment that went over that. It conveyed status and position in that society. It's the second garment that Jesus takes off when he washes his disciples' feet the night of the Lord's Supper. Jesus was essentially saying, you're not going out and relying upon any status or position that you have. We're keeping it incredibly simple. So what is this about? The simplicity of elimination. It's time to bring sharpened focus to the mission. And so what is that focus specifically for Jesus and his disciples? What is the main thing? Jesus had been going village to village teaching. The disciples are going out and doing the same thing now, and they've been given authority over unclean spirits to heal people. And we know that they're speaking with people teaching or sharing the gospel, because Jesus says if you come to a place where you're not being heard, move on. So it's basically just teaching and healing. And we see that elsewhere in the Gospels. That was the primary activity of Jesus at the start of his ministry. Jesus knew 2,000 years ago that there's power in simplicity. It reminds me of the old Shaker song, Simple Gifts. 'Tis the gift to be simple. 'Tis the gift to be free. 'Tis the gift to come down where we ought to be. And when we find ourselves in the place just right, 'twill be in the valley of love and delight. There's freedom in simplicity, but it's about centering ourselves in the simple things that are truly meaningful and that bring life. What is it that you seek in faith? What do you seek in Jesus? At the most basic level, Jesus has a message of good news for you and offers you healing. If you're willing to listen anew, you might be surprised at the meaning and inspiration that message offers to us today. It's a word of grace and peace that has the power to bring healing and hope. The remaining words of Simple Gifts are, when true simplicity is gained, to bow and to bend we shan't be ashamed. To turn will be our delight, till by turning we come round right. Simple Gifts was a kind of liturgical dancing song that involved turning, but it's also a kind of training and rehearsal for the turning around that we need to do in the course of life to receive the gift of life that God has to offer. Sometimes we need to turn and make a change. That was one of the things Jesus said at the end of our gospel about repenting. Simple doesn't always mean easy. As Jesus warned his disciples, not everyone would accept them, and we know that Jesus also was rejected. Paul expresses this same grappling with a sense of a simple mission that perseveres and endures in the reading we heard from 2 Corinthians earlier. As he wrestled internally with something, he hears Jesus say to him, "My grace is sufficient for you, for power is made perfect in weakness." Instead of trying to escape or transcend his situation, Paul makes a change or a turn in his thinking and approach instead. And Paul writes in response, "So I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may dwell in me. Therefore I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities for the sake of Christ. For whenever I am weak, then I am strong." As Christians, we may be called to live our faith more simply, both living and sharing the freedom of the gospel with confidence, knowing that even if it's rejected or ignored, that God's peace will remain with us. This message we've received is a word about God's love for every neighbor, even those who live across the sea and in foreign lands with foreign gods. It's a word that brings hope and new life to those who have been struggling and face despair in the face of circumstances. It's a message that breaks down human rules that get in the way of life and healing for those who need it. It's a message of love that is willing to sacrifice so that everyone hears it. To me, this remains a message worth sharing freely. Put simply, remember that you are loved. All doubts and contrary statements have been cast aside. Amen. That's this week's message. You don't have to navigate the road ahead alone. You can join with others at All Saints. Visit allsaintsmtka.org for more information. Have a great week.